Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is our 26th episode. Yes, we've just passed the quarter century mark, and it's actually hard to believe that I haven't interviewed an investor yet. But that is changing today. My guest is TJ Mahony, who is a partner at Accomplice, one of Boston's most active venture capital firms. Before joining Accomplice as an investor, TJ was CEO and co-founder of FlipKey, which was acquired by TripAdvisor. And prior to FlipKey, he was part of the core team of amazing people that helped build Compete to a successful business that was ultimately acquired. TJ is what I consider a product-minded investor, as he's able to add value to entrepreneurs in so many ways based on his own experiences. Plus, TJ is the type of guy who's always willing to help people out by giving advice or making connections and intros. I know that each time I've met with him, you leave the meeting full of energy and lots of new ideas swirling in your head, which is exactly why I was excited to interview him. In this episode, we cover lots of topics, like the story of his basketball career at Macalester College and how he was just 2 points away from a major milestone, the story of FlipKey, where he shares an embarrassing story about a meeting at Stephen Koffer's house, who is the CEO and co-founder of TripAdvisor. It is a classic. How he got into angel investing and venture capital, why he's looking to invest in founders with quote-unquote a disease, advice for founders on building teams, and a lot more. Okay, before we get to the interview, if this is the first time you're listening to the VentureFizz podcast, I want to say welcome and thank you for joining us, but please make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you'll get all future episodes. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with TJ. TJ, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So shockingly, you're the first investor I've talked to for this podcast, so I'm excited about that. Thanks for taking the time. And I wanted to ask you an interesting question to kick things off. What does the number 998 mean to you?
So it sounds like you were on our website, so my profile. So I went to Macalester College. I was a varsity basketball player for 4 years, starter for 4 years, one of my claims to fame. And in that time, I had scored some points. In my last game of my senior year, I was told that if I scored 26 points, I would hit the 1,000 point mark, which was significant because there's a plaque in our athletic department that features everyone who's reached this milestone. So during the game, I only scored 2 points in the first half, so I stopped thinking about actually hitting the milestone. But in the second half was probably the best second half of basketball I've ever played. I could kick the ball and it was going to go into the hoop. And if you believe it, with like 2.5 minutes left, we were down by 10, but I stole the ball, came down and I dunked it. One of the rare times that I actually had a dunk. And I was pretty pumped up. And the other team called a timeout and the coach pulled me over and removed me from the game. And I sat there wondering why. And I figured he thought that the game was out of hands, 8 points. And so with 2.5 minutes, he put in a freshman and the game ended. A reporter came over afterwards and asked me why I was taken out. And I told him, I don't know. Why is that your question? He said, well, you finished the game with 998 career points. Like, you just needed one more basket
to hit the 1,000.
And so my last basket was a dunk.
Nice.
And
That's good.
And the coach took me out and that was it. So I missed this
milestone.
And
on a plaque, right? There's this whole plaque in Macalester that has 1,000 points scored.
So it's become an ongoing joke. It's brought up often.
It's a better story that way.
It is a better story. The coach later apologized. He said he didn't realize I was that close, and he wanted the crowd, because I started for 4 years, so he wanted the crowd to give me a standing ovation, which I don't think they even did.
Right.
And it was just a miss. And they apologized pretty profusely after the game, but I'll never have that. But I'll have a good story, though.
They should have one of those one-day contracts that you sign on as a scholarship athlete just to score one basket and then put your name on.
I jokingly asked the president of Macalester how much I would need to donate for 2 points.
All right, well, let's take a step back. So you grew up in Colorado?
In Boulder, yes.
In Boulder, great. And then why did you choose Macalester?
Honestly, it was the best school I got into. I was a decent student, but not a great one. And but I was a pretty good basketball player. So at the D3 level, I it opened a lot of doors to some of the top liberal arts schools. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, the McAllister coach just kept calling me, and it was this really good school. I knew a few people from Boulder that had gone there that really sung its praises, and that was it. So I headed off to Minnesota. First year was super cold. I almost transferred, but decided to stick it out, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I'm extremely loyal and a huge McAllister Scouts fan.
That's awesome. And then that brought you, after graduation, to Accenture.
Yep. First job out of school. I'd actually interned. I was on an iBanking track, had done a lot of internships with various banks, but it was clear the commercialization of the internet was like in your face. Began to really understand the applications and how it was going to change my personal life flow. Mm-hmm. And Accenture had these various training programs. And so I decided that I was going to go down the technology route, started taking computer science courses, taught myself how to code. I was not very good at coding. So Accenture charged companies to have me code their applications, which is criminal, scary. Totally criminal.
But that's their business model.
But it was really valuable in that year of coding, I at least understood the basics and fundamentals of logic and how applications stick together, which doesn't really change from one computing paradigm to the next. The general logic is always there. And so it always helped me communicate. It's why I've kind of think of myself as a product-centric guy, because I've always been able to communicate between the business objectives and engineers, because I know just enough not to offend them. And on the business side, I know just enough of the constraints to be reasonable with how to approach any given problem. So I did not enjoy my year at Accenture, but I very much appreciated the experience and, I guess, mental framework it gave me.
It was a good foundation.
Yeah.
Coming out of school.
Yeah.
And then you joined an internet high-flying consultancy that brought you to Boston, right? Zephyr?
Yeah, Zephyr. Matthew Berkeley was a childhood friend of mine. He was the co-founder of Zephyr with Tony Chan, who now runs Cue Ball Capital. And so Matthew said, yep, come on over. I came on over. It was awesome. Got my taste of a startup. Everyone's in t-shirts, jeans, thinking differently, moving fast, trying to break things. And a year later, I was out of a job. So I went to, at that time, that was the dot bomb. You could not get a job. Right. Engineers couldn't get jobs. Right. So I considered moving back to Boulder. I was running out of money, started working for a general contractor for $15 an hour, cash under the table, hammer and nails.
Wow.
Helping do renos in Beacon Hill. And kept doing that until Stephen DeMarco, who was one of the other co-founders of Zephyr, took over the CMO spot at Compete.
Got it.
Gave me a 90-day contract to come in and act as one of their client service consulting kind of reps. So I started doing analysis and strategic PowerPoints using the Compete clickstream data. And that 90-day contract turned into 6 years. Compete is where I met David Cancel. It's where I met actually a number of entrepreneurs here in Boston. Jay Meadle, Greg Sachs, Dave. Stephen was a great mentor. Scott Ernst has gone on to run both L2 and Macromill. So there was people often don't give Compete enough credit, but there was a dense pool of talent at Compete, and we resurrected that thing 3 different times out of the ashes. And that is where I really cut my teeth.
And you did a couple things. Like you said, you helped with the client services team as far as building out part of that business. But then you also built out Compete.com, like the actual analytics side, where me as a website, I could go in and pay or get the free version of Compete and compare my traffic to others.
Correct. And this is where I worked with David Cancel closely throughout the whole trajectory of Compete. But Compete.com was the closest partnership he and I had. And it was he had determined that it was kind of crazy that we had this terabytes and terabytes of clickstream data. And we would only share the insights derived from it with Fortune 500 companies for $1 million. Yet everyone was on the internet. Everyone, like entrepreneurs, like big and small, are building applications, and like the data itself is useful at a broader public sense. And so sat down and said, let's release this data. How do we release this data? And so we basically said, we got to move the corporate site to some other domain. Compete.com is going to be a consumer public facing entity, and it's going to open up these insights to the world. So we built Compete.com. We also built a number of applications around it. We had toolbars, we had plugins. We built a consumer survey panel as well, but like things that touched the consumer. And that ultimately ended up accelerating the business that in many ways catalyzed the ultimate liquidity events that Compete was able to achieve. And so, yeah, it started in a room like this with a PowerPoint, and Dave and I pushing people to be like, let's go bigger. Let's touch the world and stop just closing this down to Fortune 500 companies. And we were one of the first advertisers on TechCrunch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Michael Arrington. Like we, if you go way back, you will note that for a while, Arrington stopped citing ComScore. He was only citing Compete. And I didn't pay him to do that. I think he just naturally did it because I was one of his only advertisers. Mm-hmm. And so we got this little rectangle static banner, paid him, I believe, $5,000 a month. He often didn't invoice. He would call, and this is early days.
Yeah.
And Arrington would call and be like, I can't remember if I invoiced you or not. Can you check your records?
Right.
And I would literally write a handwritten check and send it to him in the mail. And that was like, that's the time that all of this was happening.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was invaluable to be able to look inside what was happening on the internet and all this clickstream data, which gave me the confidence that, I felt like I understood certain the mechanics of consumer behavior online pretty well, and just not needing a lot of smart people through our consultations. But like, again, we had like an unfair advantage of being able to look inside every website on the internet through our clickstream panel. And so, yeah, that was an empowering 6 years.
And it's a product that I miss because eventually they did sunset the product.
Because ComScore ended up, the business got kind of split up a bit. ComScore ended up buying that product, and then they sunsetted it because it competed against its paid product. Yeah,
got it. So then, once the acquisition happened, is that when you ended up going off and starting your own company?
No, I started FlipKey probably a year or two before Compete was sold. What had happened is, so during this time where we're launching Compete.com and all these other products, I started flying back and forth between New York, Chicago, SF, and things were happening. Like Web 2.0, was basically being coined right around then. And the first Web 2.0 conference and summit happened. Like now, I think, 10,000 people show up at that conference. There was like 300 people there. And so things were happening. Like it was, and the people of those 300 people, it was some of the names that built LinkedIn, that built PayPal. Like it was real anchors of what has become the ecosystem, I guess. And so in that time, I just bought my first house. And I was traveling so much, I came back and I got my first mortgage bill. And that mortgage bill, I was a little shocked by. I kind of overlooked taxes and insurance, things like that. Right. And so I divided it by how many nights I'd actually slept in my bed. Mm-hmm. And I was paying close to $300 a night to sleep in my own house. Right. And I thought to myself, like, I should just live in a hotel, or I should turn my house into a hotel. And that is when the concept of FlipKey was born. So what I started to do is
Which sounds like an Airbnb precursor.
What is now Airbnb, that concept was born 2 years before that in my condo in the North End. And so I created a listing. I put it on VRBO and Craigslist, and I started letting strangers come into my house while I was gone. I would come home. There would be $1,000 check on my table, a wine bottle, and a thank you card. And I was like, they are so appreciative. Like there's something big happening, and I'm making a lot of money too.
Right.
And it was crazy. Like I would take my keys, because there's no lockbox, I would hide them inside my car. I would keep one door unlocked in my car, parked on the street. I would tell the guest which street I was on,
Right.
my license plate, which door to open, and where I hid the key inside the car. And they still thank me for a wonderful, as being a wonderful host. So I was like, wow, if you could productize this and make this comfortable and trustworthy for folks, you could do this at scale. And so I got David's lead engineer, Carl Query, was the engineer I worked closest with at Compete. Sold him on the idea, and we resigned and broke off. We had a good arrangement with Compete. They were supportive. Mm-hmm. And we did part-time work for about 6 months, I would say. And we were asked to come into the office 2 days a week. And then otherwise we could do anything we wanted. And it was a good transition period for both parties. In that time, a lot of the logistics and the legal stuff and the operation, a lot of things that we had to pull together were weighing me down a little bit. So we brought on a third co-founder who was Jeremiah Gall, who was a former attorney at Testa Hurwitz. He had been doing web side projects, and he came on as our COO. He's also the godfather of my second born child. So we're good friends. We were good friends before that. But that's how the team kind of formed. Right. And then what happened was we had this plan, and it was around it was the idea of, helping people monetize their most valuable asset, which is their home, and showing that most people have anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months in aggregate in a given year where their house sits unutilized, their primary home. And so we went through that. We looked at it, and we're like, this is a massive, massive opportunity. And there is evidence of people doing it. I'm doing it. Couch surfing existed right then, where people were sleeping on other people's couches. Unlike Airbnb, our focus was purely on having access to the whole unit privately, not having access to a shared bed or anything like that. Not a shared bed, shared room. That's a different marketplace. So that's what we did, and we had a good team. We built a prototype, and nobody would fund it. People said it was crazy.
And were you looking here in Boston primarily for
Looked
investors?
here in Boston.
And this is what year, just context-wise?
This would be in 2007, 2007, I want to say.
So very few...
2006 when we incorporated. So that's when we started the process.
Angel investors that would be notable of writing checks back then, probably, right?
So we did have... So I will say that Matrix was one of the first firms that brought us in. Nick Bime was there. He really liked it. He really liked us. I didn't know what to do with $5 million. And so we couldn't tell a story that made the partnership feel comfortable, because I really just wanted $1.5 million just to prove it out regionally. Right. And so ultimately it was a pass, but Nick came in personally. And when Nick came in personally, Sheila Marcello participated. We found some early Facebook guys that were in the travel space. So we were able to put a $500K round together. It took 5 months, but it materialized, and we were able to have enough capital to actually start hiring some folks. In terms of leveraging that capital to then get the check that we really needed, we met with everybody. We had 2, 3, 4 meetings with a bunch of Boston firms, whether it was Matrix, Spark had us in a bunch. There was definitely interest in the concept. We're Venrock, where David Beisel used to be, and a number of others. Then we went West Coast, and my favorite meeting was with Josh Koppelman at first round, who it must have been about, I remember I was sick. I remember he seemed unhappy in the meeting, but which is too bad, because they would have been perfect. And Josh goes through it. He was an eBay guy. He gets marketplaces like this, and he was like, this isn't going to work. this isn't going to work because your business model is predicated on changing human behavior. Humans, we exchange, we transact things, we do not share things. And like primary home, like that, like I just don't see a world where that's going to happen. And I thought it was like existentially, like it was an interesting objection. Like, does this really change human behavior? But if you go back, you're like, but human behavior, like people would share if it economically benefits them substantially. And I think that that's the point I was missing, was drawing and showing how this was going to fundamentally change people's wealth and their ability of where they live and the quality of life. Because for many individuals, it actually is able to remove their cost of living. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Which tends to be your highest cost. So I didn't construct a strong enough story that helped the world understand that this wasn't about someone making like a couple $1,000s here and there. It was about literally changing lives to where economies would be built around it, which is all hindsight now, right? Like right. You see what's happened with Airbnb. But that's where we actually believed in all that stuff. I guess we just didn't tell the story strong enough. But in our defense, neither did Airbnb. I mean, Airbnb had a lot of trouble getting this going. At one point, there was a gentleman who bought 10% of that company for $100,000. They were out of money. They were about to be shut down. And this guy gave them, a kind of bottom feeding offer, $100,000 to keep you in business. I want 10% of the business. Wow. So imagine, like, when I talk to some of my entrepreneurs, especially, like, it's never a straight line. Right. Entrepreneurship is like, if you think that your company is going to follow the trajectory of Mark Zuckerberg in the movie, right? What the hell is the movie called?
Social Network.
The Social Network. Yeah. Like, that's just not how it goes, right? Yeah. It just doesn't trend that way. It's a very, very crooked path. Yeah. And so Airbnb almost died. So we almost died too. We couldn't get any funding. What happened was, again, we were on good terms with Compete. Compete had troves of proprietary data. You look at vacation rentals 10 years ago, they existed. This market existed. There was just no data around it. There hadn't been one research report ever published on it. Wow. So I published the first report. I took all the clickstream data and started showing the trends of VRBO. I got A1 Vacation, which people have not heard of, but HomeAway came in and bought a bunch of. There was a bunch of listing sites out there, and VRBO was by far the largest. And then there was probably 20 others. HomeAway came in and bought the top 5 and like consolidated them all. So looking at all these, started looking at the traffic trends, who were doing what. We were also able to tag people who were logging in and surveying them. So we could actually get qualitative input from people who were active vacation rental owners who were renting it out online to get a sense of what they were doing. We also scraped the internet, found every property manager in the United States, surveyed them. So we produced this report that was like, this is vacation rentals. This is how fast it's growing. This is in the United States. I think at the time we said 5% of the population considered a vacation rental before a hotel. In Europe, that rate was 50%. Wow. So part of the thesis was the U.S. is going to get more comfortable with this, and this market is going to 10x in the relatively near future. Anyways, we published this white paper. We sent it out to all the property managers, and it found its way onto every corporate development desk in the travel space. So within a week of releasing that report, we had inbound from Expedia, Hotwire, Priceline, which is Booking.com, and as part of that, TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor was local, and part of what we were trying to do was create the platform we were focused on at this point was creating trust, and we wanted to start with guest reviews. And we had built a very specific guest review system that was designed to work for vacation rentals. TripAdvisor did not work for vacation rentals at the time, and so we actually unofficially declared ourselves the TripAdvisor of vacation rental industry, and we publicly would say that, and others would publicly recognize us as that. And so all of that just generated an inbound where Steve Kaufer asked to sit down with us, and we began a friendly exchange of how we saw the industry.
So then what happened after that, right? So Stephen Koffer's reaching out, founder and CEO of TripAdvisor. Like, what happens next?
It's a little intimidating. We're like 26 years old. We, Steve's a very serious, very smart, serious man.
Yeah.
And this is in the old TripAdvisor building, and he's got a bunch of people in there. Adam Mendros was in there with a couple others. And so we explain how we see the industry and the nuances of it and why we don't believe that how hotels have gained a trusted reputation, how that won't work in this space the same way. And they believe it. Well, they don't, I should say they believe it. They respect our perspective. And then Steve said, well, why don't you show me what you built? And I said, all due respect, but you guys asked us here. You guys could crush us at any time. Like, I'm not really prepared to show you exactly what we built.
Competitive threat.
And he got very irritated and said, I have a checkbook. Do you like checks? And I smiled and I said, I do like checks, but I'm not prepared. Can you give us 60 days so I can at least be prepared to take you through what we're building? We agreed to that, and literally 60 days later, we were back in the same office, same table, and we took them through basically our beta. And I explained why we chose certain decisions we had made, and from there, they came back and offered, they basically said, listen, if you start getting, this is how strategic deals work, where if we were to take a venture check, it would probably push them in the direction of building it themselves. If we were to partner with them, we could take a strategic check, partner with them, and de-risk a little bit. And that's what was presented to us. Is like, you say you're the TripAdvisor of vacation rentals. Well, you can't say that when we TripAdvisor are the TripAdvisor of vacation rentals.
Right. Exactly.
And so we had to go home and figure out, like, do we want to lower the ceiling on the potential of our personal, our financial potential of this business, mm-hmm. or do we want to go all the way and just try and be independent? And it was a really difficult decision. It seems harder now than it was then, because at that time, HomeAway had just raised $500 million. Wow. So our main competitor just announced a $500 million round. We had $50K left in the bank. We could only make payroll for a couple more months.
Oh my God.
Airbnb was still pretty much unknown, but had raised a couple million. And there was others that you haven't even heard of. PickPackGo was launched by the founder of AvantGo. They had raised like $5 million. But, there was money going around. And so we felt like giants were lurking. Mm-hmm. And but we were on to something big. So their offer, once we were able to negotiate it, it ended up feeling like the most attractive option that we had. They were able to capitalize the company. They resolved our demand problem by giving us access to all the TripAdvisor traffic. We were also able to speed up our brand recognition by 5 years by simply associating with TripAdvisor. And you have to realize too, at that time, TripAdvisor was the hottest brand in travel at the time. Yeah, it was a rising star. It was far from it's kind of stage of plateau right now, but at that time, it was definitely the star child. And so that was it. So I will say that the story, the day before we verbally closed, Steve Koffer asked me over to his house to have breakfast on Sunday, and Sunday or Saturday, I can't remember. And it was just him and I, and he has 4 kids, and 1 or 2 of them were like playing around, and we were just having bagels. And suddenly he was like, "I've been having so much fun. This has been a great conversation. I've got to go pick up my kid at, I believe, Hebrew school. And do you want to come along? I want to keep talking." And I was like, yeah, okay. And so I'm probably a head taller than Steve. And so we go into his garage, and he walks to his car, and I'm just following him. Just I'm kind of overwhelmed by everything that's going on. And the next thing I know, I just slam my head against, I don't know. It was one of the horizontal supports of the garage door opener, because it was a low garage. And so I get into his car and we keep talking, and all of a sudden my eyes are going blurry.
Oh no.
I have blood dripping down my face. I've split open my head and there's literally just blood all over. And so he actually has a Band-Aid in the car. And so I have a Band-Aid, and I'm bald, and I have a Band-Aid stuck on my bald head. And so anyways, when it was all said and done, I went home, and the next day we got verbal confirmation that we were getting close to reaching an agreement. And so then we worked for 4 years. We constructed this very unique agreement with TripAdvisor. They owned the majority of us for 4 years. They then bought the minority stake at the end of that 4 years. That's when I left the business. Mm-hmm. My co-founders have since gone on to start new companies. Carl is the CTO of BondLink that just did their Series A. Mm-hmm. Jeremy went back to the vacation rental world and started Breezeway, which sells logistical software to property managers in the vacation rental space. And my CMO, Eric Horndahl, started Renoviso. They just did their Series A. Yep. And so I'm proud that we were entrepreneurial in creating a business, but we created an entrepreneurial spirit inside of FlipKey, where there have been several businesses already birthed from that. And so I hope to continue seeing that occur. Because it's the mini mafias that create ecosystems. So you hear a lot about the Endeca mafia, the HubSpot mafia, but there are other mafias. Compete was a mafia. Yep. I hope that FlipKey one day can have enough companies birthed out of it where you would begin to relay it all back, and I take pride in that. Yeah, I take more pride in creation than really anything else.
It's so important. Obviously, the mafias go so far, and there are so many unrecognized mafias of companies that did have that entrepreneurial spirit and hired the people that had that mind share to go start their own companies. Yeah. Actually, we do like alumni slideshows we call them spider webs, that are just that, of people that have gone on to either found companies or are in executive leadership roles building companies. So, yeah, the mafias are important. So after FlipKey, at what point did you start getting into angel investing? Because that's kind of what was the segue to where you are now as an actual investor at Accomplice.
So I ended up, Highland invited me to be an EIR, an entrepreneur in residence. And at the time we lived in Beacon Hill. So it was a short walk for me, and they had an awesome office. And I really liked Craig Driscoll. I was obsessed with the business of people. Like surrounding yourself with talent, to me, was the easiest way to actually build sustainable things. And so I really wanted to better understand, like, how do you find, attract, organize, manage, and acquire talented people. And Craig Driscoll, this is what he did at Highland. So I ended up there, and in that, guys like Walt Doyle and other people started coming through the door, and people were working on these projects. So Walt had Drizzly. He just put, he just put a personal check on it. And he was like, yeah, dude, they're putting a syndicate. Like, do you want to invest in Drizzly? And I just kind of blindly did it because Walt was doing it. And, but then I started working with the Drizzly guys. Right. And in sitting in the Highland office and seeing how they were looking at deals, and then getting deal flow myself because people thought I was an investor because I had an office there, I just began to see patterns. And again, always coming back to like people, like who are the people involved with this? Who are the people running this? How good are they really? How good are the people they've attracted? And so the same thesis I ran FlipKey by, which was let's just go get the best people. I began applying that to what I was seeing come in the door. And so I ended up making various bets, and they ended up all kind of, not all, but like they all kind of started tracking pretty well. And when I had time because I wasn't really working. EIR isn't a real job. So I was able to really do a lot of advisory work for a lot of these companies. And in actually helping them, they would tell other companies he actually helped. And it just kind of grew organically from there, where I was getting introduced to good companies and amazing founders. which ultimately led me to write more angel checks, get more into it. And then I was able to connect with Accomplice on a couple of occasions. They had created Boss, which was really created to catalyze angel investing in Boston. And so I was like, listen, I would love to be part of Boss, but like more, I would rather just run it.
And Boss was founders kind of finding deal flow that Boss would write checks.
Correct. So the way that Boss worked was saying, listen, we want to catalyze angel investing. Sometimes a new angel investor will look at an opportunity and think, I mean, what's my 20K check going to do? Or 10K check? Like checks range from 10K to 50 to 100. And so sometimes you're like, does this really help? But we wanted them to feel really empowered by saying, like, if you truly like a company, you're going to put your own personal capital in, plus provide some level of mentorship, we'll give you leverage. We'll put $250,000 behind you and even give you our carry on that. And so the idea there was to really allow people to feel like empowered to help create a company. And so I have basically organized and cheerlead around that, the ethos of people who have been fortunate enough to win and create, to empower the next generation. Like, pay it forward. And so you have been chosen because, like, the world has said that you've either succeeded or you're on your path to succeeding. So, like, let us help you, give you a toolbox so that you can start bringing up, like, the next generation. So that was Boss. And at that point, I now had a formal job at a venture capital firm. I'm now working with a lot of entrepreneurs, not just a lot of entrepreneurs that are now Boss companies, but are actual members of Boss, are 50 of the most prominent CEOs and founders in Boston. And so what I was already doing was now beginning to hit scale because I just had more resources and a platform kind of, which is Accomplice. And so that was my maturation process into getting more and more serious in investing and really refining my filter, refining how I think about how companies are created, how I think about founders, how I think about team builds. It's impossible to just walk in and know how to be a good investor. Totally impossible. And so I do think that I have what's the word I'm looking for? I've had the benefit of a fire hose for the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. Between Highland, my own experiences, my own network, Highland, and now Accomplice, I've been able to have multiple perspectives, one of the broadest networks in Boston, a good one where I have meaningful relationships with very special people. And so now, I now have joined as a full-time partner because I think that the tool set is there now for me to truly help build large, long-lasting companies.
What's been the biggest surprise as an investor? Either things that you see entrepreneurs do that you're like, wow, they just never learn, or things that you didn't know about venture that opened your eyes?
The lessons from entrepreneurs go on and on. I think there's a million lessons. If I were to boil it down to, let's just call it 2, I would say that Fred Lalonde of Hopper said it once that he has a disease. He has a disease where he has a vision. He's undeterred from it. And often he's been given offers for his company on multiple occasions. He says no every time. Because he thinks he can actually dominate the entire space. And he speaks of it as a disease. Like, he can't get this out of his head. And what I've noticed about the guys and women that build the biggest things is they have a disease. Right. There's a worm in their head that they can't get out. Mm-hmm. And they're at a speed that's faster than others, and they're comfortable with it. And they say things that make you uncomfortable because it sounds crazy. Oisin Harahan at Handy once, and dude, Handy was teeny at the time. I said, hey, listen, a good friend of mine is now the CPO at Service Magic, which became Home Advisor. I was like, I have a call with their head of corp dev. Like, do you want me to kick off? You want me to put you guys in a room together to see if there's something there? And he was like, to see if I would buy them. I was like, well, no, to see if you might be interested in, like, you know, as an option for you, because like if things don't
work out, yeah, get
a little faster on your end. He was like, no, if those guys, I will be in touch with those guys in 2 years, and I'll be buying them.
Right.
And so I got off, and I was like, that is just so arrogant, and I cannot, like, the kid is out of his mind. But then watching Oisin over the next few years, I was like, yeah, it was a little crazy, and I don't think, you know, will that actually happen? Like, remains to be seen. But I get it. Like, he actually believed that.
Right.
And he made decisions, and he's telling investors, he's telling his employees, like, this is what we're trying to do. What this lead generation business they're playing is dead. Like, we are going to create this transactional engine, and we are going to operate cleaning and handyman service in the United States. And so that is, you know, for any entrepreneurs listening to like that's what you have to ask yourself when you want to take venture money or build a venture scale business, is like, does your vision, does what you want to build, do you have a disease around it? Like that you're just undeterred. So that's one. It's like finding the founders with a disease. The second would be, is the art of the politics of venture capital. There's not that many actual people. Some firms have been around forever. Some are new. There's weird interpersonal relationships across all of them. And so like there's this weird unique dance that you need to learn how to do properly to because you need capital partners. You need to create brand. You need people to know that your check means something. Your conviction is worth more than someone else's conviction. And to do that is, it's a weird blend of art and politics. And that is, if you were to write a book about it, it would sound silly. You would literally need to create an ongoing series like Silicon Valley to begin conveying some of the nuances of what I see and experience sometimes. So is it a bad thing? Not necessarily. It's just something that you don't realize until you're in the belly of the beast.
Yeah. Now, as a product-minded investor, that obviously adds a lot of value to entrepreneurs. One of the other strengths that I've realized just by knowing you for as long as I have is the team building aspect, the recruiting. So I always see you hustling, trying to connect great people to companies. So talk about that piece of, how do you advise founders on building their teams, recruiting, and how do you connect the dots there?
First and foremost is that you have to establish it as a priority. I tell every CEO that I work with, I say that their first priority is raising capital, to always just know where the next dollar is coming from. The second is building a team. Operating, being creative, your actual product, it's third. It's literally third on the list. And so one, making sure that they're actually focused on it. And then two, helping the bar for how people think about talent is different. And so just getting them to understand the difference between an average hire and an amazing hire is the next point, where I will early on offer to do last interviews with like the two finalists and then give my opinion on either say you can't hire either of these people or that there's a clear difference of these two. And so I think that's where it is. It's just like getting them to buy into it and then working with them to hone their own filter system. And then they kind of got to be on their own at that point. And they've got to make their own calls. The other thing that that I tend to try and do, and this is early on, you can't keep doing this, is like for key hires, I will take time and I'll dig deep. So I will go out to the network. I've even built applications that help do this to connect really influential, knowledgeable people with certain skill sets to help others find people like them. And I'll lean in, because often if you can just set the bar high early, the bar tends to stay high. Mm-hmm. If the bar is set low early, it tends to stay low. And I will refrain from naming names, but I have companies like, actually, I'll name on the good side, like Love Pop, where Wambi and John have created a high bar from the beginning. Yep. And they keep raising the bar. And I won't go through their current team, but if you were to look at their current org chart, you will be shocked at the quality and seniority of the people that are building a massive, what appears to be greeting card company. It's actually bigger. It's not a greeting card company, but that's for another day. And then I've had some other companies that have struggled that actually had really well functioning businesses, but kept adding people, added them because they were cheap, added them because they were available, and never dug into truly creating center nodes of like amazing, incredible people. And those businesses ultimately, deprecated. Yeah. And so the correlation is just kind of in your face around what happens when you surround an opportunity with talent versus not.
Yeah. Well, that's powerful value to instill into your, the founders that you're working with. Just my background as a recruiter, you'd see different types of founders, and ones that truly valued and want to set the bar high, and then others that were just like drowning in work and just needed someone to pass work off of. And you just would sometimes be horrified. Like, do you know how important this hire is, right? And just how strategic, and just how they went through the process or selection.
And remember too, like, if I go back to the first two jobs of the CEO, raising money, attracting people, attracting talent, like the functions are the same.
Right.
You have to convince, you have a wildly unprofitable business that has very few employees with giants hovering over you. And you have to convince someone to write millions of dollars to climb that mountain. So that seems like a bet, like an impossible sell. Well, at the same time, you're a young company. You can't compete with the Google, Facebook, HubSpot like offers in the market from a salary perspective. You have to convince people who are extremely valuable, who are being asked to work at a number of different places, to come work for you for below market wages, because the stock option might someday change their life, and you have to convince them that that is a likely scenario. And so I find that it's the founders, entrepreneurs that are able to tell stories and make people believe like that are able to simply, like, they're forces of nature. They're able to make things happen. They magnetize both people and resources around them. And those are the functions that build business. Strategic execution, tactical, like rollouts, like all that stuff like that. That just flows out of good teams. And we can talk about what are good strategies, this and that, but like it has to start with people. Yeah.
Let's talk about Boston. And we can talk broad, but I also like to bring it a little bit more specific around, you founded a successful consumer company. Boston's always had this preconceived notion that you can't build consumer companies here in Boston, yet, I argue the other point. But what's the landscape of Boston currently as you're, looking at deal flow and consumer companies, or just the general market?
That consumer thing actually makes me a little irritated.
Yeah, me too.
It's like, so you go around and I'm irritated on two ways. One, there's plenty of consumer companies here, whether it's like TripAdvisor, Car Gurus, Wayfair, LovePop, PillPack,
DraftKings.
You got DraftKings, and we can go on and on. Yeah. So like, bullshit. There's consumer companies here. What I'm actually disappointed in, and where Boston really needs to step up, is that we talked about mafias earlier. Mm-hmm. Our consumer companies here do not effectively create mafias. Mm-hmm. So for instance, TripAdvisor, how many startups have come out of TripAdvisor alumni? someone's going to say, well, car gurus, that doesn't count. Like Langley was a co-founder of TripAdvisor. So that doesn't count. I'm talking about kicking out alumni, like new entrepreneurs. So TripAdvisor, I'm unaware of any. So car gurus, it's now public. You got pretty soon a lot of Langley's guys will be liquid. Well, I hope we see some spin-outs there. Like that is how you create these viral viral expansion ecosystems, is that these winners have to kick out 5 other winners. And now HubSpot has done a great job of that on the B2B side. And Deca has done a great job. Compete, again, I come back. Now, granted, obviously I'm a little biased, but like Compete kicked off a bunch of entrepreneurs that have created nearly a dozen successful businesses.
Right.
And so on the consumer end, you just haven't seen that. And so like DraftKings, there's no liquidation there, but like there's no liquidity event, not liquidation. There's no liquidity event yet, but like DraftKings needs to create some new companies. Mm-hmm. And so Wayfair as well. And so Wayfair, how many new companies have been created by Wayfair alumni? Any?
I don't think so.
So these companies are super important. Steve Koffer is was one of my mentors. I look up to him so much. So this is not an indictment of any of these companies or CEOs. Niraj Shah is, in my opinion, one of the best CEOs in America. Yeah. But like something's happening. Like I don't know what it is, but our winners in the consumer space are not creating new companies, and that has to be rectified.
So that's problem one. I agree there needs to be more mafias. The other thing that baffles me as we're sitting here in Cambridge is Google has how many employees all working on different nuances of Google products. It's not like Facebook's mainly like the infrastructure, networking, scale side of their business. Like no one leaves Google in Cambridge either to go off and build and raise money and start this crazy idea.
It is. I mean, have you looked at the salaries lately?
But so is that the problem? Is it the when they look at their W-2 between their salary, bonus, RSUs, it's like, well, I'm fat and happy here. Why would I go take a risk?
Honestly, yeah, it's my best guess. Every time I run into someone from Google, they tend to be very smart people, right. And they tend to tell me, I make a ton of money. I don't work very hard. So it's hard. You need the only people that break out of that are those with the disease. Mm-hmm. Those with the disease rarely go work for Google. In fact, they look at Google as giving up. And so I think that's why it's like those with the disease aren't attracted to ever working there. And then one of those that are in there, they're probably never inspired. They never catch the disease because they're fat and happy. Yeah. That's a hypothesis. Right. I have no idea, but I have not. You bring up a good point. I've seen one person from Google start a business in the last year here in Cambridge, and he was like an account rep.
Like the one company, Mabel, right? That was Stackdriver, Dan Belcher and Izzy Aziri, that they were acquired in like 21 months by Google for their cloud services. Mm-hmm. And I applaud them because they have the disease, right? It's like now they're off to build their next company, and they're disrupting a market that no one's challenging. Testing, QA, right? Yeah. And they're bringing machine learning to it. They just raised a boatload of money, and they're going to build hopefully a pillar company here in Boston. So it's that type of bring it back to what you said, a disease, right? They want to build companies, not just hang out like on Silicon Valley where there's the roof deck of all the founders that are just like hanging out.
Yeah, I mean, the disease is twofold. You want to build and you don't want to sell. Yeah. Like JJ Allaire is, I mean, he's a remarkable entrepreneur that does not get spoken about enough. Probably because he doesn't like talking to people, but
he's amazing.
But his track record is
insane.
Is totally insane. But when he recruited his first employees, and I know this because one of his actual very first employee is a buddy of mine. He was very clear. He's like, you're going to have stock options, but they're not worth anything because I'm never selling this company. So don't value them at zero, because you'll never be able to exchange them for anything.
Unless we go public.
And even then, he I don't think, again, I wasn't there, but I think his point was, this will never go public. Like, I will always just run this company, and this is my passion. So like these options are kind of fake to a degree. Mm-hmm. And so that's the mindset of someone who's like, I'm not building something to sell it.
Right.
I'm not building something to share it with the public. Like, I'm building it because like I want to build the best thing in this space ever and make it always be the best. And so that's like, you're basically trying to find that person, that mentality, and a bunch of other tools that they have in their kit. And then every once in a while, it all comes together.
Yep. So true.
And it's a rare breed. But anyways, it is fun because I get to meet remarkable people, even folks that we are unable to, good people that I'm unable to fund. I still try and help in small ways, whether it's an introduction or some insight into some case study that I think applies to them that they need to be aware of. For those that probably are out of their element, I encourage them to keep going down the path because it'll probably be a journey that they will forever appreciate and they'll learn from. But I'll also be pretty candid that I think it's going to be a hard road and they need to be emotionally and financially prepared for that. And so that's it.
Cool.
Well, yeah.
On that note, TJ, thanks so much for your time. Honestly, we got so much great information. So thank you for taking the time to share your words of wisdom here. Well, that's our show. I hope you found it useful and entertaining. If you did, please make sure you subscribe so you'll get future episodes. Also, please consider leaving us a 5-star review and share this podcast with all of your friends and colleagues in the industry. It all really helps us out. Last but not least, don't forget to visit VentureFizz.com, the most trusted source for tech and startup jobs, news, and insights. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.